Have you ever wondered what would happen if a group of racist men picked the wrong woman to mess with? What if the person they thought was an easy target turned out to be someone trained to eliminate threats before they even happened? Drop a comment below. Tell us where in the world you're watching from and what time it is right now. And trust me, you'll want to stay until the end of this story. Because what begins as a casual afternoon in the park turns into a brutal wake-up call. For them. The late afternoon sun draped the city park in a soft, golden haze. Birds chirped lazily in the trees, and a group of children laughed on the swings nearby. On a worn bench facing a quiet pond, Jordan Steele sat alone, one leg crossed over the other, seemingly at peace. Her black leather jacket lay folded beside her, revealing toned arms and a faint scar on her forearm, barely visible in the sunlight but undeniable to a trained eye. She wore simple jeans and a gray tee, her braided hair pulled back in a low, no-nonsense ponytail. To a casual observer, she was just another woman taking a break from the noise of the world. But beneath that calm exterior, every cell in Jordan's body remained in a heightened state of awareness. Old habits died hard, especially for someone who'd once served as a Navy SEAL. Her eyes scanned the area not out of paranoia, but instinct. A jogger passed by and offered a polite nod, which she returned with a faint smile. The stillness around her should have been comforting, but Jordan felt something in the air, a shift, a drop in the atmosphere that she couldn't quite explain. Across the pond, under the shade of an old oak tree, 4 men loitered, laughing in that sharp, aggressive way that didn't match the peaceful setting. One of them, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a black hoodie, leaned against the trunk with a cocky posture that screamed dominance. His shaved head gleamed in the sun, and a faded tattoo crawled up the side of his neck. His name was Duke Walker, and Jordan had seen his type before, in war zones, in prison yards, in hate rallies. He wasn't here to relax. He was here to hunt. Duke nudged the wiry man beside him. Ricky, Patch Dalton, his right-hand man with a patchy beard and eyes that never stopped moving. Duke tilted his chin toward Jordan. "That one," he muttered under his breath, just loud enough for his crew to hear. "Sitting there like she owns the damn place. Easy pickings." Patch cracked his knuckles, sneering. "Bet she talks big and folds quick. They always do." Jordan didn't need to hear them. She felt it. The itch on the back of her neck. The prickle between her shoulder blades. She turned her head slowly, locking eyes with Duke for just a heartbeat. He didn't look away. Neither did she. That was all the confirmation she needed. Her posture didn't change. One arm remained draped over the back of the bench, the other resting on her thigh. But inside, her brain had already entered combat calculus. 4 of them. Leader, big, probably strong, but slow. Patch, nervous, twitchy. The 2 younger ones, mid-20s, cocky, followers. The kind who jumped into trouble just to prove they weren't afraid. She caught a whiff of cigarette smoke and cheap cologne on the breeze. They were closer than they looked. "All right, gentlemen," she whispered to herself, a hint of a smile teasing the edge of her lips. "Let's see what you've got." The men began to move, slowly, casually, as if taking a walk through the park, but their direction was deliberate, toward her. Their laughter grew louder, not from humor but performance. They wanted attention, power through presence. A few passers-by noticed, glanced uneasily, and quickly looked away. Duke took the lead, his boots crunching against the gravel as he approached. Patch and the 2 younger men fanned out, forming a loose half-circle. Predators circling prey. Jordan didn't flinch. She shifted her position slightly, letting her shoulder slump just enough to appear off guard. To the untrained eye, she looked passive. Vulnerable, but every muscle in her body was coiled. Ready. "Afternoon, ma'am," Duke said with a wide, insincere grin. "Beautiful day to be all alone out here, huh?" Jordan looked up slowly, her gaze sharp as broken glass. It was. Patch stepped in closer. "You look real comfortable. Mind if we join you?" Jordan didn't respond. Her eyes moved from one face to the next. None of them had the discipline to be dangerous alone, but together, with their arrogance, they could become a threat. Still, they hadn't made the first move, and until they did, she'd wait. One of the younger men snorted. "Bet she thinks she's too good for us." "She will," Duke said with a smirk, "after we teach her some manners." And just like that, Jordan's patience ended. The time for passive observation had passed. The time to stand had come. Jordan stood slowly, the bench creaking slightly beneath her as she rose to full height. Though she was shorter than Duke, there was a shift in the energy the moment she got to her feet. Her movements were calm, deliberate, like a soldier surveying a battlefield she'd walked 1,000 times before. Her eyes stayed locked on Duke's, and for a brief second, the smirk on his face faltered. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't step back. She simply adjusted the strap on her bag and said evenly, "You really want to do this?" Duke let out a low laugh, trying to reassert dominance. "Lady, you've got no idea what kind of mistake you just made." Patchy Beard snorted. "Oh, she thinks she's tough, got a little attitude. That's cute." One of the younger guys, Kyle Henson, the one with sunburned cheeks and twitchy hands, stepped closer, puffing his chest out like he was ready for a middle school brawl. Probably the type that cries racism every time someone looks at her wrong. Bet she's got a sob story ready too. Jordan didn't blink. "You've got about 3 seconds to walk away before this turns into something you won't forget." Travis Cole, the second young man, sneered. "Oh, she's got jokes. You hear that, Duke? She thinks she's giving us a warning." Duke's eyes narrowed. "No, that's not a warning. That's a bluff. See, I've dealt with mouthy women before. You stand up, try to act tough, and then crumble the second it gets real." Jordan's expression didn't change, but her muscles shifted subtly. 1 foot back, hands relaxed but poised. "If it gets real," she said softly, "you won't be standing long enough to see it." That was the last straw. Kyle lunged first. Predictable. Wild. Sloppy. Jordan moved like water, sidestepping his momentum, grabbing his outstretched arm, and twisting his wrist in one smooth arc that sent him crashing to the ground with a startled yelp. He rolled onto his back, groaning, clutching his elbow. The others froze, eyes wide. Travis's jaw dropped. Patch's smirk disappeared entirely. Duke, to his credit, didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, fists up like a barroom brawler, and swung hard at her head. Jordan ducked, fluid and controlled, then came up with a sharp elbow to his ribcage. The sound it made was dull and satisfying. Duke stumbled back, wheezing, his hand grabbing at his side. Patch came next, more cautious than Kyle, but still clumsy. He threw a looping punch toward Jordan's jaw. She leaned back just enough to avoid it, then delivered a precise kick to the side of his knee. He dropped like a sack of bricks, howling as he hit the dirt. Travis hesitated, then grabbed a stick from the ground, a fallen tree branch thick enough to hurt. He charged, swinging it like a bat. Jordan didn't move until the last second. She stepped into the arc, knocking the branch upward and off course with her forearm, then shoved her shoulder into his chest, sending him stumbling backward. By now, Kyle was back on his feet, but barely. His arm hung awkwardly, and his confidence had been shattered. This ain't worth it," he muttered, backing away. "She's crazy." "You cowards," Duke barked, his voice strained. "Get her!" Jordan's eyes flicked to each of them. 4 men, all breathing hard, all second-guessing their decisions. She adjusted the strap of her bag, eyes calm, but burning with control. "You had your shot," she said quietly. "Now it's my turn." She stepped forward, targeting Duke. He raised his fists again, pain flashing across his face as he tried to hide the damage she'd already done. He swung wide, again with the brute force, never with technique. Jordan stepped inside, parried the punch, and drove her knee into his abdomen. His breath fled his lungs, and he dropped to one knee. She grabbed the collar of his hoodie, lifted him partway up, then shoved him backward. He hit the ground with a grunt and rolled onto his side, coughing. Patch, trying to redeem himself, reached for Jordan's shoulder from behind, but she spun, catching his wrist and twisting until he dropped to the ground face first. She held it just long enough for him to cry out before letting go. "You done yet?" she asked, her voice Steele. The 3 men on the ground didn't answer. Travis stood a few feet back, frozen. He didn't move, He didn't blink. He just stared at her like he'd seen a ghost. Jordan took a slow step forward. He stepped back. And then he turned and ran. Smartest move he'd made all day. Duke was trying to sit up again when the faint sound of sirens cut through the late afternoon air. He looked toward the sound, then back at Jordan. You called them?" He coughed. Jordan didn't answer. She didn't have to. The sirens grew louder, closer, and then red and blue lights flashed through the trees. Patch struggled to his knees. "This ain't over." Jordan stepped toward him, crouched down just enough to meet his eyes, and said, "For you? It just might be." She stood tall again, breathing steady, eyes locked on the flashing lights as 2 patrol cars pulled up onto the gravel. Doors swung open. Officers stepped out. One of them called her name. "Jordan Steele?" She nodded. "They're all yours." As the officers moved to cuff Duke, Patch, and Kyle, Jordan looked back at the bench where it all started. Her jacket still rested there, untouched. So had her resolve. And this? This was just the beginning. The flashing lights faded behind Jordan as she sat across from Officer Eli Navarro in the precinct's quietest interview room, the hum of the overhead light casting faint shadows across the file in front of him. Her posture remained steady, but her muscles ached from the earlier fight, and a dull throb pulsed along her forearm where Travis's branch had scraped her skin. Yet none of it mattered now. The real work was only beginning. Navarro flipped open his notepad, eyeing her with a mix of curiosity and admiration. "So," he began, pen poised, "you said there were 4 of them. Can you walk me through what happened again?" Jordan recounted every detail with soldier-like precision. The slow encroachment, the body language, the threats, the moment they crossed the line. She gave him names: Duke Walker, Ricky, Patch, Dalton, and the 2 younger men, Kyle Henson and Travis Cole. She described their behavior, how they worked like a pack, how it wasn't about robbery, it was about power, intimidation. Eli's pen scratched quickly. When she finished, he leaned back, brow furrowed. "You're saying this wasn't a one-off? You think they've done this before?" Jordan nodded. "I'm not guessing. I'm certain. These guys were too confident, too comfortable. This was routine for them." Eli's lips pressed together. "We've had reports like this. Minor assaults, harassment, mostly against people of color, but no one ever pressed charges. No one ever had evidence." Jordan tilted her head slightly. "Well, now you do." Later that night, back in her apartment, Jordan sat with her laptop open, her fingers moving fast across the keyboard. She wasn't content to wait. She never had been. She began searching local forums, news blurbs, police reports, anything that hinted at similar incidents. What she found disturbed her. Over the past 6 months, there had been more than a dozen reported cases in nearby parks and public areas. Minor scuffles, threats, vandalism. The suspects were never identified, or when they were, the cases were dropped, but the descriptions matched. A tall, bald man with neck tattoos and younger men following his lead. It was always the same neighborhoods, always the same pattern. She leaned back in her chair, letting the pieces settle in her mind. These weren't isolated events. They were coordinated. Her phone buzzed. A message from Naomi Cross lit up the screen. "Saw the footage from the park. Are you okay?" Jordan smiled faintly and immediately called her. Naomi answered on the first ring, her voice breathless with worry. "Jordan, what happened? I saw someone post a video. It's all over a neighborhood forum. People are talking." Jordan recapped the incident, then detailed what she'd found since. Naomi's silence on the other end was loaded. Finally, she said, "This sounds organized, like something bigger." "I think it is," Jordan said. "And I think there's someone funding it, controlling it. These guys aren't smart enough to pull this off themselves." Naomi's voice lowered. "Let me dig. I've heard whispers. Some construction guy backing local political campaigns, donating to community groups. But there's no paper trail, yet." Jordan ended the call with a promise. They'd compare notes the next day. She stared at her screen a while longer, then clicked open a new tab. If there was someone at the top, she needed a name. And she needed it fast. The next morning, Naomi showed up at Jordan's apartment with coffee, 2 folders, and a fire in her eyes. "I think I found something." She dropped the folders on the table. "A name keeps popping up in connection with these groups, not directly, he's too careful. But his companies are funneling money through shell accounts to organizations that just so happen to be active in these neighborhoods." Jordan opened the folder and saw the name printed in sharp black ink. Calvin Granger, a well-known real estate developer and construction magnate. Clean record, publicly praised for his community development efforts. But Naomi's documents told a different story. The money trail, though murky, lined up with the rise of these intimidation incidents. "It's not proof," Naomi said, "but it's smoke. And where there's smoke, there's fire," Jordan finished. At the precinct later that day, Jordan met with Eli Navarro again. He looked more alert this time, more involved. She handed him the folders. "Granger's the connection. Naomi found the threads. They're thin, but they're real." Eli flipped through the pages, jaw tightening. "Damn, this guy's got a reputation. Political connections, big money." Jordan folded her arms. "And a tendency to clean up his messes before they go public. But he didn't expect someone like me to walk into it and fight back." Eli rubbed his face. "Okay, we can start building a case, but we'll need more. Witnesses, transactions, maybe one of the guys from the park flipping." "Patch is your best bet," Jordan said. "He's not built for prison. He'll talk." By evening, Jordan and Naomi sat in a quiet cafe on the edge of downtown, their laptops open between them, news articles and search tabs crowding every screen. They reviewed what they had: incidents, money transfers, Granger's company shell accounts, and his growing influence on city zoning boards and private security firms. Naomi scrolled through a community forum post. "Look at this. People saying groups of men have been showing up outside black-owned businesses, just standing there, staring, not doing anything illegal, but present. Intimidation," Jordan muttered. "Calculated and quiet. They're forcing people to move, shut down, or stay silent." "And Granger profits," Naomi added. "Once the neighborhoods are destabilized, guess who steps in to revitalize them?" Jordan's stomach tightened. It wasn't just about race, it was about money, control, power. "This guy's building an empire on fear," she said. Naomi nodded. "And now we tear it down." Jordan looked up from the screen, her expression hardening with resolve. "Let's bring the whole damn thing into the light." The next morning, the air in the precinct was sharper, more focused. The casual rhythm of phone calls and shuffling papers had shifted into something more deliberate. Jordan stood beside Eli Navarro in a glass-walled conference room as he laid out a map of the city, red pins marking every location where an incident tied to Granger's suspected network had occurred. Each pin represented someone harassed, threatened, or pushed out, quietly and methodically. Jordan's eyes swept across the board, her jaw tightening. "It's a grid," she muttered. "They're zoning us out, block by block." Eli nodded grimly. "They know exactly what they're doing. This isn't hate for hate's sake. It's a business model." He turned and tapped a photo on the board. "But we need someone to say it out loud. Someone inside." Jordan crossed her arms. "Then let me talk to Patch. He's the weak link." Eli hesitated. "He's in holding. Nervous as hell. If he talks, we need him protected." "He talks," Jordan said flatly, "and I'll personally make sure he lives long enough to regret every decision that got him here." In the cold interrogation room, Ricky Patch Dalton sat hunched, his hands trembling slightly as he stared at the scratched surface of the metal table. When Jordan entered, he flinched like he expected a punch. She didn't sit. Instead, she dropped a file in front of him. Photos, financial records, timestamps. His name circled in red ink. "You're looking at multiple charges, Ricky," she said, voice low but firm. "You know how this goes. You'll be the face of this while the man funding you walks free." Patch looked up, eyes wide. Look, I didn't mean for it to go that far. We were just supposed to scare people, you know? Show presence, make it uncomfortable. That's all." Jordan leaned forward. "You were never in control. You think Granger gives a damn about you? You're a pawn. He uses you to do his dirty work, then leaves you to rot when things go sideways." Patch swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. "You can protect me?" "If you give us what we need," Jordan replied, "we can. But you need to tell us everything. Who's involved, how he moves the money, who gives the orders, all of it." And Patch did. His voice shaky at first, then steadier as he realized someone was finally listening. He spoke of meetings in abandoned lots, envelopes of cash delivered through middlemen, encrypted group chats where orders were relayed under code names. He described how Granger's construction companies issued fake contracts, consulting fees that were funneled into shell organizations posing as community action groups. Those funds were then distributed to crews like Duke's, street-level enforcers used to terrorize minority-owned businesses and families. "Granger never gets his hands dirty," Patch explained. "But he's behind everything. Everyone knows it. We don't say his name in the open, but everyone's afraid of him. You cross him, you disappear." Eli, listening from behind the one-way mirror, stepped into the room when Patch finished. He brought in a signed witness protection agreement and had Patch moved to a secure facility. As the door closed behind him, Jordan exhaled slowly. "That's the crack," she said. "Now we make it a rupture." Later that day, Jordan met Naomi in the back room of a quiet coffee shop they'd used before. Naomi had been working non-stop, following the digital trail Patch had described. Her laptop was open to a spreadsheet filled with names, wire transfers, and flagged email addresses. "Patch wasn't lying," she said. "Everything matches. The shell companies, the consulting invoices, the timing of the attacks. I even traced one of the community outreach donations to a firm listed under Granger's brother-in-law." She scrolled to a highlighted line. "This one's the key. It links to 3 different events: vandalism, forced business closures, and a city zoning board reversal." Jordan stared at the screen. "It's a coordinated campaign to clear out entire neighborhoods." "And once they're gone," Naomi added, "Granger swoops in with redevelopment. He profits off the same fear he fuels." They brought the new findings to Eli, who immediately looped in a federal task force liaison. If this crossed state lines, which it was starting to, then it would fall under the jurisdiction of federal hate crime statutes and possibly racketeering laws. "We're close," Eli said, scanning the documents. "We need one more piece, someone closer to Granger, someone who can tie him directly to the strategy." Jordan's eyes narrowed. "Then we flip someone higher up, one of the middlemen." "I know just the guy," Naomi said, tapping on her tablet. "Thomas Kane. He handles most of Granger's financial transfers. I've seen his name on a dozen contracts. Always quiet, always under the radar." "Let's find him," Jordan said. That night, Jordan and Eli sat in an unmarked car outside a sleek office complex in the business district. Kane's name was on the company directory, hidden behind an innocuous-sounding firm. Urban Equity Consulting. "Doesn't scream conspiracy," Eli muttered. "That's the point," Jordan said. They watched as a well-dressed man exited the building, checking his surroundings before getting into a black SUV. "That's him," Naomi's voice said over speakerphone. "License plate matches. If you follow him, keep your distance. He's paranoid." Kane led them to an upscale restaurant on the other side of town, where he was soon joined at a private table by none other than Calvin Granger himself. The 2 men talked quietly behind a curtain of glass and low lighting, but the surveillance tech Naomi had patched into the precinct picked up just enough. "Keep the pressure on in those areas," Granger said in the recording. "If they feel unsafe, they'll sell. We buy low, simple as that." Kane replied, "The crews are getting reckless." Granger shrugged. "Then we replace them. They're tools. Nothing more." Back at the precinct, the team played the recording on a loop. "That's it," Eli said. "Direct intent. Malicious strategy. We can tie him to the violence now." Jordan's fists clenched slowly. "He's using fear like a product. Let's show him what accountability feels like." The warrant came through faster than expected. By the following evening, Jordan stood shoulder to shoulder with Officer Navarro and a team of federal agents outside Granger's downtown headquarters. a towering glass and steel monument to ambition, draped in polished lies. From the outside, it looked like a symbol of progress. Inside, it was a command center for calculated chaos. "Let's move," Eli said, his voice clipped and steady, but Jordan caught the fire in his eyes. They breached the doors with swift coordination, officers spreading through the lobby, issuing commands, securing every floor. No sirens, no spectacle, just precision. The kind of strike Granger had never anticipated, because he believed he was untouchable. In his private office on the top floor, Calvin Granger looked up from his desk as Jordan stepped through the door, flanked by 2 agents. For a brief moment, his mask slipped. His eyes flickered, not with fear, but with insult, as if someone had violated a rule written in gold. "You have no idea what you're doing," he said, standing slowly. "This is harassment. You'll hear from my lawyers within the hour." Jordan met his gaze, unshaken. "Save your breath. We already did." She stepped aside as one of the agents presented the warrant. "You're being placed under arrest for conspiracy to commit hate crimes, racketeering, and funding acts of intimidation and violence." Granger scoffed. "That's nonsense." But his voice cracked on the word nonsense, and Jordan didn't miss it. Back at the precinct, Naomi sat beside a cluster of prosecutors and detectives in the operations room, the corkboard behind them plastered with photos, financial statements, email screenshots, and recorded transcripts. At the center of it all, Granger's name, circled in red ink with lines branching to Duke Walker, Thomas Kane, and a growing list of shell companies. Sarah tapped at her laptop, coordinating with federal teams combing through Granger's offices and safe houses. "We've got hard drives, encrypted flash storage, printed ledgers, all with matching patterns," she said, "and the restaurant recording ties it all together." "We're not just charging him," Reyes added. "We're dismantling the entire network." As Granger sat handcuffed in the interrogation room, glaring across the table, his lawyer barked objections at every question. But they didn't need him to speak. The evidence was already screaming. What mattered now was preparing for the courtroom, where optics, pressure, and public perception would collide with justice. News of Granger's arrest exploded across the city the next morning. Headlines flashed on every screen. "Business mogul Calvin Granger arrested in hate crimes conspiracy." Community groups who had long whispered about coordinated harassment now had a face to point to. Local officials scrambled to distance themselves from Granger's past donations, and journalists from across the region flooded the precinct steps demanding statements. Jordan, however, stayed away from the cameras. This wasn't about press, it was about finishing the job. In the courtroom, Granger's defense team was relentless. They painted him as a successful businessman unfairly targeted by an overzealous ex-military woman with a vendetta. They discredited Duke and Patch's testimonies, highlighting their criminal records and plea deals. "These are desperate men saying what the prosecution wants to hear in exchange for lighter sentences," the defense attorney argued. "My client had no knowledge of any criminal activity. He's guilty only of believing in second chances." Jordan sat in the back of the courtroom, jaw tight, watching every smirk, every subtle manipulation of language meant to blur guilt into coincidence. But the prosecution was ready. Naomi's financial timeline, paired with the digital forensics team's findings, laid bare the structure of Granger's empire. Each dollar tracked, each consulting payment exposed. They played the restaurant recording again, and this time it echoed differently, in a room full of jurors. Granger's voice, smooth and surgical, saying, "If they feel unsafe, they'll sell. We buy low, simple as that." A chill ran through the courtroom. The prosecution leaned into the theme, not just a man funding hate, but a man building profit on fear. Testimony from community members followed. A black bookstore owner who'd shut down after weeks of masked men loitering outside. A Latino family whose home had been spray-painted repeatedly before zoning officers coincidentally reclassified their block for development. They weren't just stories, they were proof of strategy. During a break in the proceedings, Eli joined Jordan in the hallway. "He's on the ropes," he said quietly, "but his lawyers are going to pull every card they've got. We need something unshakable for closing arguments." Jordan thought for a moment. Patch said Granger only showed up twice in person. One of those meetings, he mentioned an abandoned factory outside town. That might be the key. Within hours, a team was dispatched to the location. Inside, they found surveillance footage. Grainy, but clear enough to identify Granger speaking to Kane and two other men, laying out maps and pushing pins into photos of neighborhood blocks. The audio was muffled, but the timestamp and the context were enough. Prosecutors called it a visual roadmap of intent. In court, the footage played in silence. No theatrics. Just a static shot of power planning pain. When the lights came back on, the room sat frozen. Even the jury seemed visibly shifted. Granger's mask had finally cracked. In the final days of the trial, the defense grew quieter. Fewer objections, more deflections. Their confidence was gone. And on the final day, when the verdict was read, Jordan didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply stood still, arms folded, as the foreman's voice rang clear. "On all counts, we find the defendant, Calvin Granger, guilty." Outside, reporters surged, cameras flashing. But Jordan stepped into the sunlight not for the attention, but for the quiet reassurance that came with closure. Naomi stood beside her, offering a silent nod. Eli joined them, folder under his arm, his expression worn but proud. "We got him," he said. Jordan stared out at the city beyond the courthouse. "One down," she said softly. "Let's make sure there's no next one." A week after the verdict, the city still hadn't stopped buzzing. News outlets were running nightly segments on the Granger network, diving into its reach and exposing city officials, private donors, and even law enforcement officers who had quietly enabled its spread. Protesters marched outside municipal buildings demanding reforms, while community groups organized block meetings to rebuild trust where fear had once lingered. But Jordan Steele remained mostly out of sight, choosing the quiet corners of the world over spotlights. She didn't need a podium or microphone to feel the weight of what had been done. She felt it in the silence of the park bench where it all began. She returned there one crisp morning, the sky a soft gray above, and sat where she had once been circled like prey. The same pond shimmered under the overcast light. The breeze stirred the trees gently, and for the first time in a long while, there was no tension in her chest, no instinct telling her to brace, just space to breathe. Footsteps approached. Naomi Cross. Coffee in one hand, tablet tucked under the other. She sat down beside Jordan without a word and passed her the coffee. "You look calm," Naomi said after a beat. Jordan gave her a small nod. "I think I am. Or maybe just tired in a different way." Naomi smiled faintly. "You should be. You tore down an empire." Jordan took a sip, eyes still on the pond. "We all did. You, Eli, even Patch and Duke in their own desperate ways. It's strange. You expect victory to feel loud." "But it doesn't," Naomi said quietly. "It just feels necessary." Jordan nodded again. They sat in silence, letting the wind speak. Eventually, Naomi broke it. "Federal prosecutors are expanding the case. Granger's files led them to 3 other states. Similar setups, different faces, same structure. They're calling it a domestic network now. Hate-based displacement. Quiet terrorism." Jordan didn't flinch. "I figured as much." "They want to talk to you," Naomi added, "about consulting. Strategy. Maybe something long-term." Jordan raised an eyebrow. "You mean turning what I did into a job? Into policy? Prevention? Into making sure no one like Granger gets to grow roots again?" For a moment, Jordan didn't respond. The SEAL training in her had always been mission-focused, identify, engage, neutralize. But this was something deeper, something sustained. "I'll think about it," she said, "as long as they don't expect me to wear a suit." Naomi laughed softly. "I'm pretty sure they'd take you in boots and a flannel." A pause. Then she added, "Eli's starting a new task force, focused on hate crime intervention and network dismantling. You're basically the blueprint." "He deserves to lead it," Jordan said. "He was one of the few who listened when it mattered." He said the same about you. Jordan looked at her, eyes steady. Let him know I'll be available. Off the books, at least for now. Naomi gave a mock salute. Duly noted. Later that evening, Jordan found herself walking the streets of a neighborhood that had once been one of Granger's targets. It was different now. The boarded-up shops were reopening. Murals had replaced graffiti. People gathered without glancing over their shoulders. Fear had lost its grip. She passed a bookstore with a new sign in the window. Still here, still ours. The owner, a woman Jordan had seen testify at the trial, stood behind the counter smiling at a young boy thumbing through a comic book. Jordan caught her eye through the glass, and the woman gave her a small, knowing nod. Jordan nodded back. No words needed, just recognition, just peace. Back at her apartment that night, Jordan finally opened the letter she had avoided all day. Official correspondence from the U.S. Attorney's Office. Inside, a commendation, an offer, a request. She read it twice, then set it aside, eyes drifting toward the window. Outside, the city exhaled. Change was slow, but it had started. She leaned back in her chair, feeling the echo of every blow she had taken and every one she had delivered. Her ribs still ached from the park. Her knuckles bore faint scars from the warehouse scuffle. But more than that, she carried the weight of truth and the satisfaction that, for once, the system hadn't looked away. As her phone buzzed with another message from Eli, and Naomi's latest article lit up the local news feed, Jordan finally allowed herself a smile. Not triumphant, not boastful, but grounded. This wasn't the end. It was the next beginning. There would be other Grangers, other systems cloaked in civility but rooted in violence. But now there were also people like her, like Eli, like Naomi, people who weren't afraid to fight back, and not just with fists, but with facts, with truth, with unshakable purpose. Justice hadn't arrived overnight. It never did. But it had arrived, and it wasn't leaving anytime soon. What would you have done if you were in Jordan's place? We want to know. Share your take in the comments. And if you believe more people should hear stories like this, hit that subscribe button and stay with us for what's next.